was only true in fairy tales, and for someone else, but not for me.
Welcome to this final video in the section of American responses. This video is titled TV Rock. We're going to talk about the role of television in the story of rock and roll. So television has played an increasingly important role way back to 1955 with the start of American Bandstand. American Bandstand focused on dancing and it was teen oriented, and it's actually going to be on the air until the 1980s, but it put rock artists on television. So for the first time, people are regularly seeing the rock artists. It's not just about what they sound like, it's also about what they look like. Following the success of Dick Clark and American Bandstand, more and more of these music-based variety shows start to pop up, such as Shindig on ABC with host Jimmy McNeil. This show, Shindig, really focused on music of the British invasion and American pop, and it literally replaced a previous show called Hootenanny that was devoted to folk music. So even though some artists are really successful, Bob Dylan, the Byrds, they're coming in with folk music, especially when they play folk rock, that gets into the mainstream. The standard variety of folk, not folk rock or not folk pop like the Lovin' Spoonful, that music's being displaced by American pop and the British invasion. We also have another show on NBC called Hullabaloo. So let's talk about some of these acts that were successful because of TV. Not that we're successful and then we're featured on TV, but some bands were actually successful because of TV. The first band we'll talk about is called Paul Revere and the Raiders. So if you remember, Paul Revere was the one who rode through Boston at the start of the Revolutionary War, screaming, "The British are coming." And this band leader's name is actually Paul Revere. That's his real birth given name. So as a play on that, he just calls the band Paul Revere and the Raiders. And they actually dress in this Revolutionary War garb. They have the triangle pointed hats, and they have buckled boots and stockings, things like that. So they're really playing up the name. This band was the house band for a show called Where's the Action on CBS that was developed by Dick Clark. So just like the Roots are the band for Jimmy Fallon, Paul Revere and the Raiders were the band on this show, Where is the Action? Because of this, they were on the air all the time. How many people know who Questlove is now because of Jimmy Fallon, who may have not been familiar with the Roots beforehand? Questlove is one of the most famous drummers in the world now. So the same thing was happening back then in the 1960s, that this band really gained a great deal of exposure because they were on TV every night. And in fact, they're even mentioned in the Quentin Tarantino movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Margot Robbie's character is listening to Paul Revere and the Raiders. So you may have thought to yourself, if your name is Paul Revere, why wouldn't you just change your name to a different stage name? Many of the people we've talked about in this class have a stage name anyway, right? Why would you continue to go by Paul Revere? Well, the British invasion, all these British acts are coming into America, and Paul Revere was the one that warned that we need to prepare ourselves for this. So again, it's really his name, but it's certainly appropriate that the person responding to the British invasion is Paul Revere and the Raiders. They have 3 hits from 1966, Just Like Me, Kicks, and Hungry. And Paul Revere and the Raiders had sort of a kind of a rough sound inspired by many of these garage bands, and it's called the garage band sound, and they really bring that into the mainstream. And they're often compared to the Rolling Stones because they also have more of a rough, unpolished sound. I've been dropping hints since we talked about the Wrecking Crew that there is a band that has this big controversy because they're not recording their own music. Their music is being recorded by the Wrecking Crew, and it becomes public knowledge, and there's this huge public backlash, and everyone judges them and condemns them for not being real musicians and not recording their music. Well, the time has finally come to talk about that band, and their name is the Monkees. Now, the Monkees were constructed like a group of teen idols, but they were modeled after the Beatles rather than Elvis. They were specifically trying to look like the Beatles with the mop-top haircuts and with the matching clothes, things like that. Suits, mop-tops, the whole thing. And the Monkees weren't just a band, it was a TV show. The TV show was called The Monkees, and it was about this band, this fictitious band called The Monkees. It was sort of thought of as a television adaptation of the movie Hard Day's Night. Because this was this lighthearted TV comedy, they really tried to find actors who had a background in music and comedic acting. One of the main performers of the group, Davy Jones, was a former Broadway actor, and he was actually performing in the musical Oliver on Broadway on February 9th, 1964. So the day that the Beatles hit America, the Ed Sullivan performance, the day that would change everything and would inspire this television show, The Monkees, This guy, Davy Jones, was on Broadway as a performer. So they were all experienced singers, they were all experienced actors, and they were funny, all that. Another member of the band was Mickey Dolenz, who was a former child actor on Circus Boy. Well, the TV producers decided that they really wanted the band to have this camaraderie, and they wanted them to know each other and get used to improvising and acting with one another. So they had them spend a lot of time improvising, acting, doing those kind of exercises. But they didn't spend hardly any time learning to play their instruments. Again, they're singers, but they don't actually play the instruments that they're supposed to play in the show. And they figured, you know what? It's not a big deal. We'll just hire professional musicians. We'll have the cameramen stand in a way where you can't quite tell that they're not really playing, or maybe we'll teach them to play just well enough so that in wide shots it looks like they're playing, but they don't actually have to play this stuff. Again, it's a TV show. It's fake. On Grey's Anatomy, we don't expect that the doctors on that show can really perform a heart surgery because they're actors, right? That's the way these television producers were thinking about it. Well, they still wanted the band to have really great music in the show, so they went to the Brill Building, and they had these Brill Building songwriters actually write for the show. Don Kirshner from the Alden Building relocates to Los Angeles specifically to write music for the show. Carole King writes music for the show. So they're getting some of the best songwriters in the music business, and if you already have the best songwriters in the music business, you need great people to play the music, so who do they go to? Of course, they go to the Wrecking Crew. So they have really strong actors, again, Broadway, film, television experience. They have the best songwriters in the music business, and they have the best studio musicians in the music business. The television studio was really surprised by the overwhelming success of the Monkees. It was a huge hit, not only as a show though, but the music was a huge hit. The music produced from the show that was supposedly by the Monkees, this fictitious band, was really, really popular. A few similar examples might include High School Musical from 2006. That was released as a Disney Channel original movie. Yes, Disney hoped it would be a hit on the Disney Channel, but they didn't expect it would turn into the worldwide phenomenon that it did. After High School Musical came out, people knew all those songs. Start Something New, Bop to the Top, Breaking Free, We're All in This Together. People know these songs who had never seen High School Musical before. Another example would be the movie Dirty Dancing. Dirty Dancing was originally a pretty low-budget indie film, but the song I've Had the Time of My Life from Dirty Dancing went on to win the Oscar for Best Song. So sometimes you have music in movies and television that is a surprise hit and catches everyone off guard. That's exactly what happened with the Monkees. The textbook author even says that the music produced for the show was as good as any pop music being produced at the time. The opening theme song is just called Theme from the Monkees, but most people refer to it as Hey Hey We're the Monkees because that's the main line of the chorus. The song is a big hit. So the television studio decides they're going to release the Monkees music on an album that you can buy in a record store. It's not intended to trick anyone into thinking that the Monkees wrote the song. It's an advertisement. You go in, you see the music on the shelf, you buy it, and on the back it says, make sure to watch NBC's at 7 p.m. on Thursdays or whatever it is, so that you'll watch the show. Again, this is just an advertisement for the show. And what's interesting is this is in the fall of 1966, so the Beatles are right at that point when they're retiring from performing and they're giving up the mop top look and they're giving up the matching suits. They're no longer doing any of that. So the Monkees, who are modeled after the Beatles, start portraying this band that is intentionally trying to look like the Beatles right as the Beatles give up that look. That's just something interesting to think about. The next big hit by the Monkees is called I'm a Believer, written by Neil Diamond.
Come on, y'all! Then I saw her face. Ha ha! Now I'm a believer. Listen, not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love. I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried. Then I saw her face.
And they have many subsequent hits by these Brill Building songwriters. Between 1966 and 1967, 31 of those weeks, so more than 25% of the time, the Monkees had the #1 spot on the charts. That's incredible. This fictitious band, only made for a TV show, only releasing albums to promote the TV show, featuring actors with music written by the Brill Building songwriters and performed by the Wrecking Crew, is one of the most successful groups during this 2-year period. Now, one thing that's interesting about this is Michael Nesmith, who is one of the band members of the Monkees, he's actually a songwriter and a pretty good one, but the TV producers don't want to use his music, so he's writing this music and he actually gives it to this woman, Linda Ronstadt, and has a hit with it. So maybe the TV producers should have listened to Michael Nesmith a little bit. Michael Nesmith, I want you to remember his name because when we get to the MTV discussion in a few units, he's going to come up again. Well, you already know the end of the story. It's eventually revealed that the Monkees don't play their own music, and they are ostracized and they are condemned in the public as being fake because, again, this is the era of the Beatles. It's all about authenticity. It's all about the self-contained band. You're supposed to do everything, and what's more inauthentic than not writing your songs, not recording your songs? And that's what the Monkees were doing. So even though it was a TV show, there's still this public backlash, and their careers really suffer for it. Years later, by the time we get to the 1990s, members of the Monkees have spent the last few decades actually learning to play their instruments. So they have these guest spots on shows like Boy Meets World, and then they go on to perform on television shows like the Rosie O'Donnell Show and Regis and Kelly, things like that, because by this point, the Monkees can really play their own instruments. So they were so, I don't know if it was offended or probably just irritated of how ridiculous it was, but they all went on to learn to play their instruments. So now if you go see the Monkees on tour, they're really playing all of their instruments. There was a cartoon show called The Archie Show. Many of you are probably familiar with Archie. And on that show, the band was called The Archies, and they were a cartoon band like you watch it. And it's actually, hand-drawn cartoons. All studio musicians, obviously. Cartoons can't play music. But they had the song Sugar Sugar from 1969, written by Jeff Berry of the Brill Building, and that was a huge hit. We also have a show called Lancelot Link and the Evolution Revolution, and these were chimpanzees, like real chimpanzees on stage holding instruments, not a cartoon, real chimps on stage holding instruments, playing the drums. They have this song, this music video called Shala Love You, and it's pretty funny. It's one of the videos that you'll watch this week, and that song was a big hit, even though it was chimpanzees playing the music. One of the biggest examples would be a group called the Partridge Family. So this was another TV show about a fictitious family of musicians who would go on tour and perform music together. And two of the siblings, or at least the characters, two of the actors that played siblings on the show, the actors were Shirley Jones and David Cassidy. And they were teen idols, and they were the real breakout stars of the show. The big song from David Cassidy of the Partridge Family was I Think I Love You from 1970. And for those of you who are musicians, I want you to pay attention to the key of the song because it starts in D minor and modulates to the parallel major. So the verses are in D minor, the choruses are in D major, which is a pretty cool sound. Other music groups made famous by television include Donny and Marie Osmond, real life brother and sister, with songs like I'm a Little Bit Country, I'm a Little Bit Rock and Roll. They recently concluded a Las Vegas residency. In the 1998 animated film Mulan, B.D. Wong, famous from Law & Order Special Victims Unit and from Jurassic Park and Madame Butterfly on Broadway, he is the speaking voice of Captain Lei Shang, but Donny Osmond of Donny Marie Osmond is the singing voice. So when you listen to I'll Make a Man Out of You, you're hearing Donny Osmond's voice. I won't really discuss this last group very much now because we're going to discuss them much more in the second half of this unit, but that's the Jackson 5, where Michael Jackson got his start with his four brothers. The Jackson 5 is absolutely one of these examples of a group that received much of their success because of television. That is the end of this half of the unit, the American Responses unit. But I do want to take just a moment and tie together a few threads connecting different parts of our story to where we are now. This notion of success in music because of TV was really anticipated by Ricky Nelson, one of the teen idols, because before Ricky Nelson was successful as a performer with songs like Lonesome Town, he starred on the Ozzie and Harriet show. That was showing that if someone has a good voice and they're attractive of course because it's TV and you can see them, they can find even greater success in music if they use TV to support their music. With rock becoming more and more popular in the 1960s, we're moving away from this division that we saw in the 1950s of dividing music between pop and rock and R&B, and at this point, instead of pop and rock, it's pop rock and authentic rock. So now, what used to be considered pop, Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, that's completely gone from the charts. That kind of music is now considered, your parents' music, your grandparents' music. Now it's all about rock. And we're starting to see subgenres as rock as being the differences in the music industry. The British invasion, led by the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, really changed the music industry on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. But certain groups were able to have success before, during, and after the Beatles. We talked about the Beach Boys are one example. The Four Seasons are another. But there's another example we haven't talked about yet, and they are going to be featured in the second half of this unit, and their name is the Supremes. But more on that next time.